Jacobson, who is the Dean of Whitworth's School of Education. Whitworth produces some of the best teachers in the state. So we thought we should reach out to them to see what's going on. So Ron, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Rob.
Well, look, I want to go just straight into the questions. So as a parent, this might be self-serving on my part, but what things should I be doing right now to help my kids with their education? I mean, I have some skills, but this isn't one of them.
I think it's a pretty big learning curve right now. So I'll jump to that question in just a second. Let me mention something first, just in terms of some context. The reality is that for all of us, none of us have been in this place before. So we're facing something that's really foreign to us, the unknown in a way. But the truth is, if you look throughout history, if you look at human nature, in many ways, we're made for this. It's what our ancestors have been steeped in, this ability to face the unknown, to face something new, and to look for solutions. The solutions that we're already finding in this crisis are foundational to that history. Certainly, we're working on vaccines and more medical supplies and supply chains and all of those kinds of things that are really difficult to solve, but that we know how to solve, and so we'll get there. But if you think about the main solutions for me and you, they're really quite simple. Wash your hands, sneeze into your elbow or some other place, and social distancing, staying away from one another. And our experts say that if we just do those things, we'll save millions of lives. So just at the outset, when I think about this crisis that we're in, humans are actually very good, maybe not comfortable, but very good at facing the unknown. And so I'm pretty confident that we'll find our way through. So your question specifically is what should we be doing with our kids? As parents, we can figure that out during the summer, but it's much more difficult in the midst of a school year. So a number of things come to mind. First, the first thing that I would suggest is that we don't need to replicate school. So in other words, parents don't need to take on the role of a certified teacher. We don't need to plan elaborate lesson plans or with learning objectives and assessment plans and all of those kinds of things. I think one of the first things we can do as parents is take a deep breath and realize that we have what it takes to help our kids navigate this process. The second thing that I would mention is that we do need to work to create structure for our kids, but I would add a caveat, not too much structure. So in other words, it makes a lot of sense to spend some time reading to your kids on a daily basis, or reading with your kids if they're older. So you can, lots of folks will read out loud, reading through Harry Potter or some other text together. Or if nothing else, just be in the same room and read for a half hour together, reading separate books, those kinds of things. So building routines into their days. That does a couple of things. It begins to allow them to continue the learning process, but it creates normalcy. It makes life feel like it's predictable in some ways, which I think is a really, really helpful pattern for us a gift in a sense to give to our kids right now. The third thing that I would mention is that, so I said that we don't need to recreate schools, K-12 schools in our houses. Instead, what I would encourage us to do is to pay attention to your child's learning and allow their interests to guide that learning in a sense. So we are learning and have been all the time. So the moment we took our first breath, we started learning, and we'll continue that process until we take our last breath. So be creative, listen to your kids, allow them to drive their interests. So in other words, you might get up in the morning and say, what do you want to learn today? What do you want to investigate today? What do you want to pay attention to today? I remember when our kids were young, during the summer months, we would do pond journals. So pond, like little, bodies of water, pond journals. And what we do is just take a couple pieces of copier paper, fold them in half, staple them, and then go out and look at a river or a pond or a tree and ask our kids to write notes. What do you see? To draw a picture, those kinds of things. were inherently interesting to them. When I talk about what did you learn in school, they go back to those pond journals often, which is kind of crazy to me. Building a fort in the living room, making films or mashing songs on their phones, dressing up and entertaining the family. Any of those sorts of interest-driven activities where learning is inherent are things that we can grab onto and pay attention to. Right now, there are tons of resources out there, and most of those are free. And sometimes they're not always free, but they are at the certain moment because of what we're facing. So there are reading resources. Spokane Public Library website has lots of resources. There's an organization, Epic Books, which has some great resources in terms of reading. Storyline online, a series of books your kids can choose from and read from all different levels. News ELA, NEWSELA.com is free for the rest of the year, and so there's some opportunities for reading resources there. In terms of writing, Literate for Life and Teach Thought are a couple of great resources. Literate for Life and Teach Thought. More generally, PBS Kids, National Geographic, Brain Pop. It's a site called weareteachers.com that has tons of resources. In math, Math for Love, which is out of the University of Washington, has some really tremendous resources. Prodigy, Dreambox. I've even heard this morning, it was online, that J.K. Rowling has put up a new Hogwarts Harry Potter site with lots of resources for learning and those kinds of things. So there's more than that. So there's tons of resources out there to use. One last thing that I wanted to say along this lines is the truth is our teachers are phenomenal. Our K-12 teachers are phenomenal. They're professionals. They know what they're doing, and so they, and we're doing the same thing in higher ed. They will catch your kids up. They're experts at doing that. So if kids are missing some of the specifics of learning this spring, next fall, there's no need to worry. Your teachers will pick them up. I want to read this. This actually was posted by a friend of mine not too long ago on Instagram. He's a teacher, English teacher in the Kent School District. And he says this, which I think is really powerful. He says, don't worry about them regressing. So your kids regressing in school. Every single kid is in this boat, and they will all be okay. When we are back in the classroom, we will all course correct and meet them where they are. Teachers are experts at this. Don't pick fights with your kids because they don't want to do math. Don't scream at your kids for not following the schedule. Don't mandate 2 hours of learning time if they are resisting it. And he goes on just to talk about the ways that we can interact with our kids and take advantage of these times. So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind for me.
Well, very helpful. So, tell me, what should parents of college kids who are now at home do? Because that feels like a completely different thing.
You should love them and make some space for them. So as we are empty nesters, and so when our kids moved off to college and now they're on in their careers, there was a love-hate aspect to that. We missed them terribly, but it was really nice to have some space. And so those, maybe your college-age kids moving back, you're adjusting to that. But just realize this is a significant, and we're certainly paying attention to this in higher ed. This is a significant transition time for them in their learning. So they're moving from, for most of them, a face-to-face learning environment to a remote learning format. And I just met with a number of our student leaders yesterday, virtually on Zoom. They lead a club on campus called Teachers of Tomorrow. And I asked them, what has this new reality been like for them? And for them, they shared it's been an adjustment, different platforms. So are we using Blackboard? Are we using Zoom? Are we using Panopto? Keeping assignments straight, which just had never occurred to me. So if they have the same teacher for 2 different classes, when you're on campus, you're in different classrooms. So it's easy to differentiate. When you're online, the lines start to blur a bit. Navigating that online process, et cetera. But the one thing they raved about were their instructors. And so our faculty, like I said in K-12, our faculty at Whitworth, and this I think is true across higher ed are phenomenal. They know how to teach. Research tells us that the key to good learning is the teacher in the room. Well, now it's a virtual room, but it is that professor-student, teacher-student relationship. And so our faculty and staff at Whitworth, we've been working on this for weeks to prepare for remote instruction. We've done trainings. We've put up resources. In fact, our president, Beck Taylor, is actually sitting in on classes, not to evaluate, just to interact with students. And it's been a great process. So about a month ago, I asked one of my undergrad advisees, who I advise, how her classmates were feeling. And this was before really social distancing, a lot of that had ramped up. And I was expecting her to say, oh, my college students just aren't thinking about this. It's no big deal. But she said actually that her classmates were terrified, which surprised me. It's not only for our college-age students that they're navigating their courses, and that holds a significant learning curve as they move to remote learning situations, but it's the craziness of the world around them right now that I think is even more unsettling. So support them, give them grace, love them, make space for them, give them hope, remind them that we're going to get through this, that we've faced these kinds of things before. We've faced the Spanish flu, we've faced world wars, we've faced 9/11, and that there is another side to this. But I think working with college-age students, and this is certainly true at Whitworth, it's certainly true across the board, giving them hope, giving them space, and encouraging them to keep moving forward are key.
Yeah. So earlier, within the last couple of years at Northwest Passages, we hosted Tara Westover to talk about her book, Educated.
Yeah.
And Educated really is about the resilience of learning. And I'm curious, that makes me wonder, is that what the future looks like? Are we going to take some of the lessons learned from Educated to go forward in the resilience of young learners?
Yes. I was late coming around, but I actually just finished that book 2-3 weeks ago, and for me it was a brutal experience. Understanding Tara Westover's life, watching that the family interact, the physical brutality, all of those kinds of things. But I think you're right, Rob, that what really impresses me about that process is resiliency, not only for Tara as she and her brother as they moved through the education process and moved outside of that family, but just the ability for humans to face really difficult situations and to find ways to move forward. So that goes back to that idea that humans are actually pretty good at facing the unknown and solving those issues and moving forward. When I look at the businesses, already, if you watch TV during the evenings, you'll notice that businesses have already turned on a dime, and that those commercials are really focused around the current situation. So, I won't mention names, but there's one company that makes mats for your car that already has a whole line that you can just spray stuff on, it'll clean off, and it's way better than carpet, et cetera, et cetera. So that transition is amazing. And I think some really great things will come out of this. This coronavirus isn't going to destroy us. We will learn from this. We're already seeing some positive movements because of this. So a heightened focus on caring for each other. And we could all tell stories of what that looks like. We're certainly seeing stories of that in the media. A heightened need to shift education to more self-directed modes in both public and private schools. So we've already been doing this, moving away from sort of stand and deliver teacher-directed instruction to allowing students to have much more say, much more choice in their learning, and to follow those lines. And this will just deepen that conviction. A deeper understanding of a unified response. So I know that organizations really across Spokane, so Avista, for example, is offering a utility donation program the Spokane city of Spokane and Vista will match dollars. There was a thing on I think it was Instagram, or maybe it was LinkedIn, I'm not sure, but a student that reached out to a teacher who was struggling in math, and all of a sudden the teacher showed up in front of his or her house with a whiteboard and taught them math through the window. So I think there's some really positive things that are coming out of this. This isn't going to keep your kid from going to Harvard if that's where they intend to be. This is an opportunity for them to grow, to learn, for education to step out of the box. And so, like I said earlier, I think this is a chance for us to ask our kids, what do you want to learn today? The reality is kids want to learn. They're resilient. They're naturally curious. And when they can direct their learning, they want to learn even more. So in my opinion, when I think a little bit about sort of what does the future look like, I think good days are ahead. Certainly, in the short term, this is awful. This is hard. It'll take some time to get there, but we'll turn a corner.
This is probably a little bit of a selfish question on my own, but I have a son who's a high school senior at LC, and I'm curious: are there things that I can be doing to help him and parents across the region who have high school seniors who are about to make this incredible leap to college without the last 2 months of their final year? Are there things that we can really focus in on to prepare them, or is it a lot of the same things you're already talking about?
Well, I think for high school seniors, and it's very similar for college seniors, or certainly college athletes who are in their last year of eligibility, even though they could come back. There's been some moves in the NCAA. I got to be honest. The reality is that is hard to swallow for our seniors. There is a grieving process because all of that celebratory stuff at the end of the year now is not only for them postponed, it probably isn't going to be something that they can take part in. So commencement, all of those sorts of things. And so I think one of the things we can do is grieve with them, is understand the loss that involves. The other thing I think we can do with, especially when I think about high school seniors, is, and I think about anybody interested in moving on to what's next, is I'm not convinced that we should postpone those plans. So certainly we're going to postpone, some will postpone commencement or those sorts of things, but I don't think we need to postpone our futures. And so for those students who would say, well, maybe I just need to wait and not go to college next year, or maybe I need to take a gap year, or maybe I need to not, jump into this program or that program, I would say this is the perfect time to jump into those programs. So I was just talking with the director of our Master in Teaching program, which is basically a one-year summer-to-summer program where if you want a career change or you want to become a teacher, you can do that in a pretty short period of time. And the question came up, I wonder if this will cause people not to want to do that. And I'm of the opinion of, well, why would you wait? A year from now, just as they will be this spring, but a year from now, schools will be hiring. So why not jump into that process now? For those high school seniors, why not go ahead and jump into college? And most likely fall semester, fall quarter will be face-to-face. But even if it's not, even if it's a quarter of online, we're going to develop some really great online programs by then because we're being forced to do that, walk through that process. But even if it's a quarter, you're getting a head start. You're moving forward and moving into that future that is going to be really bright. And so I do think about that I would help those seniors to begin to think realistically about stepping into what's next, not holding back because of fear or those kinds of things. In the grieving process, when our kids are having a tough time, what we do is we talk to them, we listen to them, we understand. There aren't easy answers. There isn't a magic bullet that makes it all go away. But that process of interaction is huge in helping them to grow.
One of the things that I feel like I'm picking up with what you're saying is that this is maybe the wrong way of saying it, but don't waste a crisis. Like this is teaching us how to do things differently, and that can't be a bad thing.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And any crisis we go through, is certainly something like this that's a worldwide sort of thing, exacts a toll on us, and we can't discount that. But it also forces us to take a hold of that resilience and to bring change. And so I think, we could stick our heads in the sand and just say we're going to wait this out and not think about this. I think this is an opportunity for us to think. So for instance, Whitworth University is, in my opinion, has world-class face-to-face programs, and especially when I think about our School of Ed and some of the different programs that are there. We do have, though, but it's a smaller amount, really, really world-class online programs. But we're not an online university, and we never will become a fully online university. That face-to-face will always be a foundation of what we do. But what this opportunity does for us is it forces us to begin to think about, what if we really work toward building world-class online programs that are accessible to people across the region. So for right now, if you want to come to one of the universities in Spokane, you have to live pretty close to us, within an hour's drive at the most. Maybe you can go up to Newport, maybe Colville. But if you're in Oroville, you're stuck. And so if as we begin to use this crisis in a positive way and build world-class online programs, all of a sudden students in Oroville can take our classes and do their degrees all from home, a kind of grow your own model, and begin to impact that community in great ways. So I think that's just one small example. That can happen across the board, not only with institutions, but also in our own personal lives, finding ways to interact and connect with people because we're being forced to do that in different ways.
What do we do as parents to kind of that we have our own fears here, and we're kind of sitting in the middle of all of this? Do you have any advice for that sort of scenario? Like, how are we handling our own fears here?
Yeah, and I think that's a reality. I think we're all a little off kilter right now. This is, as I say, humans are good at facing the unknown and coming up with solutions. What I don't want to say in that is that's easy. When way back when we're out in the wild and a tiger shows up, it's not that we're whistling in the midst of that. Adrenaline drives, and those things are very scary. So I think about our own fear and this sense of disequilibrium that we're feeling. It's not, to be honest, unlike waiting for when a biopsy has been done and there's the possibility that you have cancer. Waiting for that diagnosis is excruciating, and there's no way to make it easier. It's not that we can say you're going to be fine, because we don't know what the diagnosis is, and I think we're in the midst of that. And so sitting in really tenuous, trying times is difficult, but it is often not our choice to run away from that. So I think about things like trust, learning to wait, and what we want to do is have this crisis over with, in 3 weeks. It's not going to happen. So we have to learn to wait and be okay with being patient, learning to love, to give, to cry, to laugh, to distract ourselves with Netflix, to exercise, to build routines in the middle of the craziness, to try to create that new normalcy, to reach out to others virtually. One of the things, so Whitworth is a Christian university, and Scripture says that it's actually love that drives out fear. Not bravery, not confidence, not surety, but love. And so I think beginning to look at those around us, one of the things that has helped me the most get out of my own head as I'm trying to wrap my head around what we're doing is to think about the person next to me, is to try to find ways to help. So sending Google Cash to Katie, our daughter's a musician in New York City, which means she's not working, she doesn't have income. And so we send her cash, and in our minds, we're supporting the arts. So finding ways to love those around us, to listen to those around us, to support those around us, allows some of that in our headspace to be averted, so that we can sort of move beyond that.
Yeah. So we were getting lots of great questions from readers watching the stream, and Peter asked, I've long been a proponent of blending online and face-to-face learning.
Yeah.
I've been exposed to far too much stand and deliver forms of education. What changes do you anticipate in education when all of this is behind us?
So my answer to Peter is that I am in the same boat. So I think actually certainly higher ed is doing this, K-12 is doing this. We are moving away from that stand and deliver model. You know, maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was certainly the norm, and it's how learning to some degree happened. But that hybrid model of online, especially involving self-learning and then face-to-face, I think holds great promise, and certainly lots of universities and schools around the state are using that. I think this crisis, so going back to what I mentioned before, I do think what this is forcing parents to do, but even more, I think what this can force learners, so I'm talking about college students or high school students or elementary students, is to begin to ask that question: what do I want to learn today? That's self-directed learning. So John Dewey, in the early 1900s talked about this, that sense of tying education to interest. And that doesn't mean that, I love Legos, so I'm going to play Legos, but that foundational interest of I am interested in the way that things interact. I'm interested in the way we can build things by putting components together. That kind of interest, when we can tap into that, it's phenomenal to see the level of motivation that pops up in learners. And so I do think, to Peter's point, I do think this allows us the chance to push forward in those sorts of directions, certainly in K-12, certainly in higher ed, and to make learning really foundationally learner-focused, and those students really driving by giving them choice and agency within their own learning is a big step forward.
So let's switch gears. What about our own parents, and how do we support them? I mean, it feels like every day I'm worried about my parents.
Yes. So and I've talked to many colleagues that are asking that question. So my dad, he'll turn 91 this June. He lives in the Tri-Cities. He still lives on his own. If his underground sprinkler breaks, he fixes them. So he's pretty self-sufficient. But we lost my mom about 5 years ago. And at that point, we were in Seattle at that point, thought about moving him to Seattle, but decided against that, mainly because we would have removed him from his community. So he has a group of friends there in the Tri-Cities that, they go out, they go to church together, they go to dinner together, they go to lunch together, they go to movies together. And so our practice really, since my mom has died, we visit him fairly regularly, but we call every Sunday afternoon and talk. But now the truth is he can't interact with those friends anymore. So he's stuck in his house alone 24/7, except when he goes to Fred Meyer to get groceries, which is the highlight of his day. So now instead we call him every day or two just to check in. So I was texting my brother, I think yesterday, who my brother lives in San Francisco with his family, and he just out of the blue said, I've been worried about Dad, so I'm calling him every couple of days. So now both of us are calling him every couple of days. And then in conversation with our kids, one lives in Seattle, one's in New York, they let me know this week, we've been worried about Grandpa, so we're calling him on a regular basis. So all of a sudden there is this ongoing conversation with my dad that's really expanded from the norm. And I talked to my dad a couple of days ago, and he was thrilled because, all of these conversations that are going on. But then he told me that he said, I've been on the phone all day long. And I'm like, really? Why? And he said, because I've been calling all of my friends in the Tri-Cities. I can't see them anymore. So he's been calling of his friends, those folks that he goes to church with or lunch with, the movies with, checking in on them. And all of those conversations have been a direct result of this current crisis that we're in. And that's not to, like I said, not to discount the horrible toll that it's taking.
Right.
But it is to say that there's good in the midst of this. My dad, like I said, is 90. And because of that, over the last few years, he's watched many of his friends die. And I think in late February, there were 3 weeks in a row we went to funerals. But he has this sense that it's not his time yet. And so wherever that comes from, whatever that means, so he lives in the midst of that. And one of the things that I think happens with COVID-19 is it currently is taking up all the oxygen in the room. It's becoming everything, and because we see it everywhere. But when I think about taking care of our parents, it's about staying in touch with them. It's about helping them make plans for the future. So, we're going to this weekend start building planter boxes in our backyard, finding ways to learn, listening to each other, going on walks, watching Netflix, all of those sorts of things. And so it's not all that different than what we're doing with our kids. I will tell you that for my dad, early on, when folks said, hey, we need to stop hugging, he's like, well, by gosh, I'm going to hug people. And I said, no, you got to stop doing that. So finally, when Inslee gave the order, my dad finally got that, and now is being socially appropriate and keeping distance. But it is that avenue of checking in, of having those conversations, of finding ways to make up for those gaps that folks are feeling.
So we have another question from a reader submitted. This is from Christy. If online education is where we are heading, how do we address the equity among students and families who don't have technology like computers and internet readily available at home?
So it's a huge issue. One of the reasons I know that OSPI, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, which oversees K-12 education in the state, one of the reasons most school districts haven't gone to complete online instruction in this time, and what I mean by that is whether it's video conferencing or interacting with students and then requiring assessments and all that kind of thing, is an equity issue. So in other words, if we're going to do that, then we need to make sure every family has some kind of device to be able to interact. We need to make sure they have appropriate bandwidth, et cetera, broadband, et cetera. And so I think one of the things that this pandemic has brought to the surface again is the inequities across language, across socioeconomic status, across cultures, and how, depending on, to be honest, your zip code or how much you have in your wallet, it changes the services that are available to you. So when I think about online, at Whitworth, we're doing a lot of thinking this year about rural and remote. So there's lots of communities around the state. And if you look at the OSPI report card, there's great variance in how well kids are doing, or whether there's a certified teacher in their classroom, all of those kinds of things. And so for us, if we're going to start training teachers, for instance, in Ione, well, they're not going to drive to Spokane, 3 days a week. We're going to have to create some kind of online instruction for them. And so when I think about higher ed, there are ways to blend that. So we can have an online instructional platform. If they don't have internet, we can work with that school district to allow them to have access in those buildings somehow. But then, in my opinion, we also need a face-to-face element. So we're going to borrow folks, master teachers, administrators in ION to actually begin to extend the lessons that we're teaching online. And so, so it's not only an equity issue in terms of resources. Do you have a device? Do you have broadband? It's also an equity issue in terms of learning. So some folks swim really well in online environments, and that's how they learn best. Others don't. And so when I think about equity, I think not only technology, but I think about how do we create learning spaces where no matter what your learning style or preference or abilities are, you're able to progress in the same kinds of ways.
So this is less of a question and more of a comment. This is from Beck, who said, "Tell Ron he's doing great." So,
well, tell Beck he's one of the best presidents I've ever worked for. I am going to brag a little bit. If being on the inner circle at Whitworth, our communication and response early on to this crisis has been phenomenal. And so I got to tell you, 3 weeks ago, I had plans from all of my School of Ed programs saying, this is how we're going to make this transition. This is what it's going to look like, down to the detail. And Beck has been part and parcel to leading that charge. Just yesterday, we had a town hall with all of the employees at Whitworth, and he's just done a phenomenal job of helping us be realistic, helping us to listen to the Spokane Health Department and CDC, et cetera, and to make good decisions. And our students, I'll tell you, are benefiting from that process.
So last reader question, and then we'll let you go here. So this is from James. How do you think the pandemic will affect higher education in the long term?
Oh, that's a $1 million question. I think for some, this will help us to become more nimble. As I mentioned, it will help us to develop quality online hybrid programs that will be useful for folks across the state. But I will be honest, I think for some, this may be the end of their tenure. I think higher ed has been under stress, I'd say, for the last 10 years, just in terms of finances and being able to continue and finding avenues of financial viability. And that's been across the board. You've seen major universities that have really struggled with debt, smaller universities certainly. So my hunch is that at the end of this, a year from now, there will be some institutions that are currently operating that will no longer be operating. I have great confidence of our institutions here in Spokane, of Whitworth, Gonzaga, and Eastern and WSU, that there's strong financial viability and they'll be around, but some around the country won't. And so this is, as much as I am positive and think we're going to learn a lot from this is a scary time for higher ed. In terms of retention and enrollment, and what does it look like, and how long is this going to last, and what kinds of reserves do we have? So, we made the decision, partly because of Inslee's directive, to close our dorms for the most part and to send our students home, those that couldn't stay for one reason or another. So those students, we made the choice to refund them their housing costs and their food costs that they had put in. That's a significant hit for the university, but we had the resources to be able to weather that storm. If we have to do that year after year, then that's going to be tough for higher ed. So I think we'll be fine. It seems like the universities here in Spokane will be fine, but it will change the landscape, certainly, partly by the fact that some universities and colleges around the country will cease to exist after this year.
Well, that's maybe this isn't the way I wanted to end, but
but I will tell you, Whitworth is great, and we're going to be fine.
Ronald, thanks so much for this. It's been great to share your expertise. So thank you. So we have a few more of these scheduled for tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll have Pat Chung, the athletic director at Washington State. He'll be talking with Theo Lawson, and at noon we'll have Spokane Schools Superintendent Shelley Redinger talking with our education reporter Jim Allen. And then at 2 p.m., we'll have Spokane Valley Mayor Ben Wick talking with one of our government reporters, Rebecca White. So thank you all for watching this stream, and we're excited to try to be able to reach out to everyone in the community again. So thanks again, Ronald.
Thank you.